Okay, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes here, more than a couple of minutes, giving an update on the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. So again, this is a working group that we've been facilitating at the University of Illinois Chicago for the past almost 3 years. Many of you are familiar with the working group, so it's nice to see so many familiar faces here. Also good to see new faces. So those of you who are new to the working group or new to learning about what we're doing, I'll just give a couple snapshot slides here at the beginning. But essentially, back in 2015, we created this forum. The idea was to create a collaborative forum where we're bringing together stakeholders from across what we call the rights-of-way industries. So bringing together energy companies, gas, electric utilities, solar companies, transportation organizations, departments of transportation, local roads, railroads, and kind of anybody and everybody in between, with the idea that there's a lot of commonalities in terms of how we manage linear landscapes, and there's a lot to be learned from each other in doing that. And so creating this collaborative environment was really the intent of the working group. Our focus has been on pollinator habitat, given that the timing of the working group coming into existence really coincided with a lot of attention on the monarch butterfly and declining pollinator populations. But I think ultimately a lot of the conversations we have in the working group come back to this idea that these rights of way and these lands that we manage really can be more robust ecosystems. And so providing those sorts of benefits across the landscape, again, is a really neat opportunity. So we're focused on bringing people together to have those conversations, providing the right resources and expertise, providing cost-effective best management practices, so bringing back kind of the realistic considerations that all of you have to keep in mind, and then really highlighting industry-driven tools and resources. At this point, we have over 200 organizations that have been involved in the working group, attending our semi-annual workshops. We have technical webinars. We have a resources page, an online resources page, which I'll share a little bit more about. We have a variety of, again, projects that we're working on, so I'll highlight a couple of those projects and work that we're doing with the task forces. I think many of you, most of you are sticking around for tomorrow, so we'll have some time to break down into some of those topics that our task forces are focusing on, everything from the candidate conservation agreement with assurances to metrics and targets, the geospatial database, cost-effective seed, and communications and outreach. So those will be our breakout sessions for tomorrow. And then a couple of the key projects, again, I'll be highlighting here in a little bit more detail. So the first one we've heard mentioned now a couple of times about the potential listing of the monarch butterfly, and specifically one of the cool regulatory mechanisms that's available to us is this candidate conservation agreement with assurances. From here on out, I'll say CCAA. And so we've been working as a collaborative through the working group to create a overarching CCAA that can provide coverage to a variety of sectors, so utility and gas, as well as departments of transportation, and then hopefully railroads as well. And really this effort emerged in full force since our last working group meeting in October of last year. So we brought to that working group meeting this idea that there was interest and there seemed to be enough enthusiasm to develop a collaborative CCAA. So avoid individual organizations having to go it alone and really try to build that collaboration. So at the October meeting, in one of our breakout sessions, or we actually had several focused breakout sessions, the idea was essentially kind of endorsed that there was enough interest to pursue the development of a collaborative CCAA. Since then, we have been really busy, and I really credit a lot of you in the room for helping us. We've been working with Dan Salas at Cardinal, who's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting to help us get this project up off the ground. So since that October meeting, we've developed a detailed timeline. So we have a detailed plan of action to complete the CCAA ahead of the listing decision by the service. We've been organizing a formal partnership. So the university has a joint fund that is essentially collecting the funding and resources necessary to support the development of the CCAA. We've had ongoing coordination with the Fish and Wildlife Service, so they've been very actively engaged in working through our questions and the basic design. The last couple of weeks, Laurel, again, has been a huge asset to our work that we're doing, and I think continues to demonstrate the service's interest in working with us on this effort. And then we've also begun actually preparing the elements of the CCAA, which I'll touch on a little bit here in a bit. I'm going to zip through this slide since Sergio did a nice job defining what those CCAAs do, but essentially they provide a incentive, regulatory mechanism to reward or encourage voluntary action ahead of a species listing. So in this case, ahead of the Monarch listing. And really the crux of what you're trying to do with a CCAA is demonstrate the net conservation benefits. So the voluntary conservation measures that are adopted, do those far outweigh any potential negative impacts as a result of operational activities on those lands? And if you can demonstrate that, which we are confident we can do, then organizations that sign on to the CCAA are provided assurances that no additional requirements or mandates will be required if the species gets listed, I should say. Of course, there's a number of benefits to having a CCAA. For one thing, regulatory certainty. If you have an agreed upon list of conservation measures and a conservation plan that you've adopted, and you have the assurances, you have a good sense of what to expect in the event of a potential listing. There's a good amount of flexibility by having this kind of volunteer agreement and basically designing it as you wish. Also, the CCAA very importantly documents all of the really good work that's being done. And I think that's really important. We've had that theme come up a couple of times, is there already is a lot of good work being done. I think the CCAA helps to demonstrate that. Then, of course, there's a number of benefits to doing this collaboratively. So as a collaborative group working on the CCAA, we're thinking or envisioning that we're not only reducing the time and effort, but also creating a higher quality agreement. And through that, we really hope to maximize the industry input and participation, and again, continue to encourage these sorts of voluntary actions across all sorts of rights of way. And there's clear value, I think, to all the parties involved, including the Fish and Wildlife Service, in terms of helping to streamline their work as well. So again, as I said, since that October meeting, we've had a formal call to participation. We sent that out in December of last year. Since that time, we've had over 20 organizations sign on to the CCAA development. Those organizations have operations spanning the U.S., as you can see on this map, and we're continuing to work and talk to organizations, particularly there you can see we have a gap in the southeast to continue to build and bring additional organizations on. Multi-sector, so we have broad representation across the electric and gas utility sectors, departments of transportation, solar companies. We have several interested railroads, but we don't have any committed railroads at this point. So all of this is, again, kind of an evolving, growing effort. But in the meantime, we're really moving forward with the technical work that has to be done. And then I should also mention, in terms of interagency coordination, I've already mentioned the Fish and Wildlife Service's role that they're playing, but also Federal Highways has played a significant role in helping us to fund that Fish and Wildlife Service support. So we're very appreciative of that type of national interagency coordination. So here's those 20 plus partners that I mentioned. Again, many of you are here in the room and want to acknowledge all of your commitments, first off. But secondly, I think as the facilitator for this project, one of the things that has struck me is the level of enthusiasm and interest, and in terms of organizations and individuals stepping up to serve chairs and really dig into the work that we're trying to do on a very tight timeline. It's just been, frankly, really impressive. So I do truly appreciate the commitments and the involvement by these organizations so far. At a very high level, I'm just going to talk through the process that we're taking. So essentially, we're beginning by defining essentially our CCAA decision space. So that is initially outlining what are those conservation measures that we need to try to capture in the CCAA. So what are those good steps that organizations are taking that are providing habitat on rights of way and other lands? And then similarly, we have to identify what we want the covered activities to be. So we need to identify what are those maintenance or management or construction activities that we would want covered. You know, they may have some negative impacts, but again, will be far outweighed by the benefits of the conservation measures. And by having those two sets of activities essentially included in the CCA, that's how you provide that coverage and the assurances that go along with them. After we've established those lists, then we're moving into the stage of demonstrating the net conservation benefit. So what is that quantification framework that we're going to use to demonstrate, again, that there is a net positive benefit through the activities that are being implemented. There's additional elements in the CCAA, such as monitoring and reporting, the application procedures and processes. We're working through those components as well. And then finally, we have the finalization. So there's potentially some NEPA documentation preparation, an environmental assessment, I think would be kind of the highest level of NEPA documentation that would be required, as well as templates and so forth for the applicants. This is tiny text, so I don't intend for you to have to read through it. But basically what I'm just trying to demonstrate here is we have 3 phases for the CCAA development. The first, phase 1, is the draft development of the agreement. That's where we're at now. And envision having that draft agreement and the related EA documentation by the end of this year. Phase 2 will be moving into more closely working with the Fish and Wildlife Service in their final review, and envision having kind of the final approved CCAA by the listing decision in June of 2019. And then depending on that listing decision, we would have phase 3, which is our application period. So if the Monarch is deemed to be warranted to be listed, if the Monarch is listed, then essentially we would have a 12-month period to include or have organizations apply under the CCAA. If the species is deemed not to be listed, then we essentially have a longer application period for organizations to sign on. So in terms of next steps, again, we have funding partners. If you're interested in joining the effort and providing financial assistance, we're certainly continuing to welcome that. We have an advisory team that's providing insight and expertise to our sector and our technical teams. And then the sector and technical teams are really doing the heavy lifting in terms of developing those activities lists, the quantification framework, and so forth. So there's, again, plenty of opportunities to get involved at various levels. And so if you're interested in learning more or participating, I encourage you to reach out and contact me. And we can take some questions at the end. But I do want to touch on a couple other projects. The next one is our Geospatial Habitat Database. And again, there's, of course, a number of databases that are in development and are out there. The original intention, I think, with the Geospatial Habitat Database for the working group was to create a central repository for organizations to report in where they're managing habitat. And the idea, again, was to first off have a better sense of what are the ecological benefits and opportunities that those managed areas are providing. Through our conversation with our partners, with the database project, we also recognize that such a central repository for this type of information also would be really helpful in developing partnerships, so finding new partners and looking for opportunities where you can share resources. Also is critically important for engaging with resource agencies, such as the Fish and Wildlife Service, and to look for opportunities to hopefully avoid listings under the Endangered Species Act or other potential implications. And then also a key tool to help us promote voluntary conservation actions. So for at-risk species, listed species, and so forth. So those are really the goals behind the database. Last year, as part of our development process, we were surveying the working group in terms of how and why they were interested in having this database. Again, super small text, but just to highlight some of the key themes that came out of that survey. One was that organizations were looking for a better way to manage data on the areas that they're doing habitat-oriented activities. So having, again, a central place to keep that data stored. Also, a way this database can help them think strategically about where they're doing habitat work and where, again, there may be opportunities either to do additional work on their lands or partner with adjacent or nearby landowners. This database also serves as a really important communications tool, so to help elevate the value and recognition of the role that rights-of-way are providing for habitat. Also helps as a broad working group for us to think about targets and goals. So if we can aggregate this information, we can report out on, how many thousands or tens of thousands of acres rights-of-way organizations are currently managing for habitat. And again, I think that goes a long way in continuing and building the conversation about the value of rights-of-way for conservation. And then I mentioned another key one was finding partners. So as far as next steps, we're this year continuing our phase 1 database build. So we have a handful of initial partners within the working group that have been helping us get a better handle on the types of data, how that data is formatted and arranged, and what's kind of the best way to move forward with some sort of basic standardized template. So we're continuing to work on that. We'll be launching a web interface that'll again provide kind of an aggregated view of the database publicly, and then also provide an opportunity for organizations to log in and add data. We're working very closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service on their Monarch conservation database, which again I think Sergio mentioned, which is a way to capture all of the conservation efforts for monarch butterfly. That's going to be considered in the species status assessment and listing decision. And so we're in the process of working out how to do a bulk upload. So from our database with the data from organizations that have agreed to allow us to share that information, we would do a bulk upload to the Monarch Conservation Database later this year and ensure that that information gets captured in the work that the service is doing. And then over the next year plus, we'll be continuing to work to expand the user base and also increase the functionality of the tool. Also worth mentioning here, I'm working very closely with the Field Museum folks. So Mark Johnston, Mark Lambrucci in the front are really the brains behind the operation there. And they've been working very closely with us from the beginning. Okay, next, excited to announce we have a new website. It's not yet launched, but we're so close to having our new website launched. We currently have what we call our resources page, which we have quickly as a working group outgrown. It was my initial very basic attempt to put together a website, and let's just say I did not go into web design for a reason. So there's plenty of opportunities for improvement. So we have this new website design, which will be more user-friendly. It'll be more interactive. We're going to build in some new elements and components to the database to really help it serve as a more valuable resource for you all. We'll have two components, two sides of the database. One will be a user login, password protected version of the site that will include our discussion board, our working group directory. We'll have basic information about upcoming meetings and activities of the task forces. So all of that will be available to people to log in. And then we'll have the public-facing version where we'll try to be unrolling more accessibly a lot of the resources that we've collected over the years. We also have a placeholder for the geospatial database. So that's the screen on the right there. that, again, will be kind of our dashboard to highlight the data that's captured in the database. So just quickly, in terms of some of the new features, we will have, again, several new pages included in the website. One of the ones, and I actually have an ask for you all here, I have a little quarter sheet that's over on the sharing table. We have had this request again from the beginning with the working group that it would be really helpful to have a directory search, so a way to track each other down to find experts in your region or nearby. And in many ways, I have served as kind of that middle point person to connect people. So this is our next step to try to create a more active directory to help those connections occur more easily. So we have a directory survey. We're just collecting basic information, contact information, interests or expertise that you have based on habitat, and then some basic company information. And then that will be loaded into essentially our phone book. So right now we have an empty phone book. We're looking to fill that up. And if you can help us do that, we'd appreciate it. So I think on the next page I have the URL, but there's also, again, a handout over there. So that's the directory search. Then again, the geospatial database will be added, as well as the discussion board, all behind that password protection. On the public side, we will have, again, a reorganization of some of the resources to be a little bit more intuitive, a dashboard to provide more frequent and flashier updates. And then another piece that I'm excited about is a quick and easy way to invite a colleague. So if you want to share information about the working group or an upcoming event, there'll be a way to do that really easily on the website. So here's that directory, like I mentioned. The survey there is www.erc.uic.edu/, this is our acronym, which we need to work on, ROWHWG_directory. So again, appreciate any responses you can provide to help us fill that phone book in. Okay, and then lastly, I just have a couple upcoming events I want to share. We have our next Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group meeting. The date is set for October 25th. We'll be back in Chicago at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we'll really spend that time focusing on program and project updates, as well as some working time for our task forces. We've also reserved some time the day before and the day after for some additional working meetings and peer-to-peer exchanges. So we'll be coordinating on those as we move forward. But at least in the meantime, mark your calendars for the 25th of October. And then we also have two other events that I wanted to put on people's radar if they're not already. One is the Rights of Way 12 Symposium that'll be in Denver in September. Working with some partners, we will have some representation of the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group there, and really trying to continue discussion of what we're trying to do with the working group, but then also specifically the CCAA work in particular. And then we also have an exciting opportunity with some of our habitat partners, Pheasant Fest, which will be in Schaumburg, Illinois, so that's just outside Chicago, in February 2019. From what I hear, will attract 30,000 potential partners, habitat partners across the U.S. So this is a really cool opportunity, again, I think, to bridge some of those conversations between the energy and transportation sectors and the conservation world. And so I think we're still brainstorming on ideas for how and what we want to do there. But I think at the basic level, to have some sort of booth about the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, have representation from this working group there to make those connections is what we're hoping to do. So if you have any ideas or thoughts or questions about that, Erin Holmes, Pheasants Forever, would be your contact there. And again, welcome any suggestions or thoughts. But again, it seems like a really cool opportunity for us to work on.